for joining us. This is Understanding SiriusXM's Fish Mapping Service. And I'm Jeff Leach, and I'm co-presenting with Dan Dickerson. We're both with SiriusXM Marine, and we're based out of the Washington, D.C. office. Our goal for this presentation is really to provide a better understanding of the features and functionality and how best to use the fish mapping service. And we'll show you the most likely or probable areas for locating fish. We do have teamed up with an oceanographic group called Maxar, and Maxar is our PhD scientists that are populating a lot of this data that we provide for you. All right, so let's talk about hardware first. First and foremost, to get fish mapping on your chart plotter, you need to have a Garmin GXM 54 unit. This is the most recent weather receiver that Garmin has produced. It's called the GXM 54, and it is compatible with multiple chart plotters. This is the entire list down below here. Of course, you can always go to the Garmin website, which is the support website, which is www.support.garmin.com. That is also where you will need to update your software to enable fish mapping. And for this particular feature and functionality, you need to have version 16 or higher. So that's important that you make sure that you update your software. Okay, let's jump into...
To chime in here, the software version 16 update that Jeff just mentioned, that was released in August of this year. So if you haven't updated the software on your plotter since August of this year, you do not have the most current software. All right, back to you, Jeff.
Okay. All right, let's jump on in. All right, so fish mapping includes 8 new features. So this is in addition to offshore weather, which you have as well as part of fish mapping service. Dan will talk a little bit more about that later. But the 8 features are as follows. First and foremost is under the sea temperature layer are 3 different specific features. And the first one is sea surface temperature contours. The second one is sea surface temperature front strengths. And then the third one is 30-meter subsurface temperatures. The second layer is plankton concentrations, and the features under plankton are plankton concentration contours and plankton front strengths. And then the last 3 features are sea surface height anomaly, weed lines, and fishing recommendations. So we'll go through each of these briefly in the upcoming slides. All right, the first and probably easiest to use is fishing recommendations. Again, this is information that has been compiled, analyzed, and then broadcast to you directly from our oceanographic group, Maxar. And if you look at the sidebar here, fish recommendations, these are the current species that we are supporting. These species all have a color. In the legend, in the top left of your screen, if you enable legend, and they have a color that coincides with each one of those species. So if you take that color code and then apply it offshore, you'll see the species that are currently most likely to be in these areas. So for instance, let's look at wahoo, and wahoo is the pink color. Dan, if you could put the cursor on wahoo, there you go. So wahoo is out there off the coast of North Carolina. What does this mean? That means that the special recipe for wahoo, its conditions, its temperatures, everything that wahoo like are most probable in this area. So does it mean you can't catch other fish in that area? Absolutely not. In fact, what we've found, and Dan and I have done a bunch of trips offshore already, and we have a whole host of pro anglers, ambassadors that are fishing for us as well and using this service. What we found that those areas more often than not, even though they're specifying a specific species, just tend to be much more productive areas. So you'd see bait fish and upwelling areas and sea surface temperatures that are conducive to the fish that are represented there. Dan, anything else in this slide?
Nope, I think you got it.
Great.
Moving on.
All right, so moving on, the next one, and probably one of the easier ones to use is weed lines. And so weed lines are showing up from NASA-based satellites that show reflectivity in the water. So if we look at weed lines and look at the ones off the West Coast, Dan, there you go. We want to make it that it's very clear that that is not the way the actual weed line appears. What our oceanographic group does in their analysis is they take those reflectivity images from satellite and then they draw contours around the weed line areas. So these are prominent weed line areas that are occurring offshore. Now, if you look at the legend on the left-hand side there, it says weed lines, and it shows you the actual time that those weed lines, that information came in. If you then move to the fish mapping menu on the right-hand side of the screen, one of the drop-downs you see is loop. So this functionality, much like we've done in our weather radar, this allows you to see the last 3 days of pertinent weed line information. So if you turn it on, then you'll notice that that legend in the upper left-hand corner changes in time. So day before yesterday, yesterday, and today, and that way you can see the weed lines actually moving. And just to clarify, I mean, we all know that the ocean is a big, giant, dynamic creature, and there's waves and there's wind, and all things, are moving out there. So we did this to try to make it easier to find weed lines. Even though they're represented here, can often be like finding a needle in the haystack. And don't be concerned or confused if, you have 3 days of weed line information and all of a sudden, weed lines just disappear. That often happens out there. With wave movement and with wind movement and currents, sometimes weeds will completely break up from one day to the next. Not to mention the fact that this information is influenced by cloud cover. So if we have a particularly cloudy day, satellite reflectivity data cannot be picked up. So there may be some gaps in the information. So wanted to point that out.
Right. That's the one of the other advantages to the loop function. If yesterday was cloudy, if you turn on that loop function, what might happen is you'll see this patch of weeds show up on the day before yesterday setting, and then yesterday the screen would be completely void of any weed line. And then the next day, today, for example, it would show up again, possibly in a slightly different location. That's telling you that, yesterday was a cloudy day, and that's why it's nothing showing up on that particular day. So the loop function can be really handy for more than just tracking the movement of the weeds.
All right. Next is sea surface temperature front strengths. Anybody who's an offshore pelagic angler knows how important sea surface temperatures are. And so what we've done here is we've labeled the intensity of the fronts, a 1 being a very weak front. Dan, can you point out one of the ones on the screen here with the cursor? And then, of course, 4 would be a very strong front. And so meaning a front meaning the biggest point of change in water temperature. So a 4 is where you'll have a pretty substantial temperature break from a lower temperature to a higher temperature. And of course, those strong temperature fronts tend to be the place that attract bait fish and obviously the pelagic fish. And for that very reason, and what Dan's pointing out right now is the fishing recommendations that we overlaid here. So you'll often see fishing recommendations in hot spots right along those temperature fronts. All right, next slide. You want to jump into this one, Dan?
Okay. So here what we're showing are not the temperature fronts. These are the actual temperature breaks. So basically a front is where there's a severe break, where there's a drastic temperature change. But for those of you that are looking for a break at a specific temperature, we've done this instead. Now, we've always shown this information with our offshore fishing package, except it's been shown as a color. The water shows as, blue if it's cold and warm if it's red if it's orange if it's warmer. But because we're using those colors for different items now, we've just drawn the lines where those colors would have changed to show you where all the temp breaks are. So you can see, for example, here, this temperature break here, it's 76 degrees right along this break, and it's 80 degrees right along this break. So if you're going after a fish that likes a specific temperature, this is where you would utilize finding that temperature range to go to in some cases. And then next, we talk about another new feature that we're very excited about, and this is subsurface temperatures. Again, the oceanographers at Maxar are able to take the data that they have and determine what temperatures are 100 feet below the surface. So they're giving us a 30-meter subsurface temperature information. So instead of on the surface, now we're looking 100 feet down. And of course, you're not going to see anything along the coast edge here because the water's not deep enough. But as soon as it drops to 100 foot, then we're getting temperature information. So we're seeing 50 degrees here, 60.8 degrees here. Basically, what we're giving you is where there's thermoclines. When you're going out to look out of the inlet for different spots, you can see, again, what even the subsurface temperatures are. Geoff, anything to add to that?
That's it.
Okay. All right. So the next layer that we are now providing is plankton concentration information, and we call these plankton concentration contours. What we're showing you is, and if you have the legend turned on, it'll show up over on the side, is plankton in parts per million per cubic meter. And again, we're also always giving you the age of that data when it is shown on screen. So for example, what we're looking at here is 0.2 parts per cubic meter. Over here, 1.79, here 2.2. So this is a higher concentration of plankton here. And plankton is what produces chlorophyll. So those of you that have been using reports and looking at chlorophyll reports, this is basically the root source for chlorophyll. So we've taken it to the next level by giving you plankton concentrations. You'll also notice that these lines change in color shading a little bit, just so it's easier just to distinguish a high plankton concentration from a low plankton concentration. Now next, what we've done is simplified those plankton concentrations even a little bit more, and we're providing a layer called plankton front strength. And like the temperature front strength, what we're doing is showing you where there are more drastic concentrations building up, and this could be caused by ocean currents or wind or several indications. This is most likely where you might also see a change in the water color, in the turbidity of the water or the clarity of the water. We can't actually give you water clarity, but what we can do is show you where the plankton is building using this format. And again, it's being done on a scale of 1 to 4, so 4 being the best. So here's a 4, and as you can see, fishing recommendations are often going to intersect where there are high concentrations of plankton building up. So this further serves to confirm the accuracy of everything that we're providing here. And as mentioned, the legend on the side can also show you the plankton front information, give you the age of that information as well. Now, next, we have another layer of information that we can provide, which is surface height anomaly. So what we're showing you here is sea level is not actually constant all over the world. Sea level, and we're not talking wave height here, we're talking actual sea level, tends to change based on several conditions. And we're able to detect that and pass that information along to you. And we're showing the information in inches. So for example, right here, it says negative 1.96. That means the sea level is down about 2 inches. We call that a downwelling. Over here, we see it's up 19.68 inches. That would be an upwelling. Well, the interesting thing is, where there's a downwelling, typically any fish activity is very diminished because a downwelling pulls all the nutrients away from that area. And if there are no nutrients there, then the plankton's not going to be there, the bait fish isn't going to be there, and the fish that we're looking for are probably not going to be there. Converse to that, an upwelling sucks in all the nutrients and brings them up with it. and then it brings in the plankton and bait fish and hopefully the fish that we're looking for. So you really want to find where there's an upwelling or where there is an upwelling and downwelling that are very close together. So where these lines tend to get real close together, that's going to be a probable location to find some fish, because that's the water column is being stirred up right there, and the fish tend to like that type of situation. You know, we've all been out fishing on a day and gotten skunked and not had a bite where we were at. It's probably because we were sitting on a downwelling and didn't even know it. So this is pretty interesting and pretty useful information to have. Now next, what we can do is start to layer those different pieces of information together. So what we're looking at on this screen is temperature fronts, which are the red lines, and again, you've got that number 1 to 4. We've got plankton fronts, which are the green lines, and again, also numbers 1 to 4. And then we've got recommendations showing up as well. Well, where all of those items come together, where these red lines come together and these green lines come together with 3s and 4s, I like to call that Christmas. You see those red 4s and green 4s start to come together, that's really where there's going to be a high likelihood of some fish activity going on. And that's going to be one of your most opportune places to locate some fish.
Yep, and if you actually follow some of these lines and look for those high both temperature and plankton fronts, you will see they do in fact coincide with some of the fishing recommendations there.
Okay. So, lastly, value points. Number 1, this is going to be overlaid directly on your multifunction display. You don't have to order this service a couple days ahead of time. You don't have to download it from your computer before you ever leave from the dock. Anytime you turn your plotter on, it's going to be there for you. And it is satellite-based, so just like all of SiriusXM weather services, you're going to be able to get this information up to 150 miles offshore. Next, this is a superset. This fish mapping package also includes all of our regular weather services. So you're going to be getting the traditional sea surface temperature information we talked about. You're also going to be getting all the storm, NEXRAD, radar, lightning, wind, wave information, all the buoy reports, all that's going to be there for you. And this is a fixed cost. You're going to pay a monthly fee, and you don't have to reorder it every time you go out. This is just a set format, just like your weather product, our weather products have always been. We do have a couple of special offers to entice you to try out this new service. Number 1, the Garmin GXM54 has a suggested retail price of $799. We are offering a $100 rebate off of that. So when you purchase a GXM54 and activate it, you qualify for a $100 rebate. That rebate is going to be in effect until December 31st of next year, not this year, but all the way through 2020. We're going to be offering this $100 rebate. The service itself is $99 a month, and again, that includes all of our regular weather. Those of you that have had our deluxe package have been paying about $55 a month. This is an additional $44 to get the fish mapping service, basically. And for anyone that does activate the fish mapping service, they qualify for 1 month free. So that's another $100 savings on top of the $100 rebate that we're offering. And lastly, like all of our SiriusXM services, we do understand that not all of you boat year-round, and you do have the option to suspend your service for up to 6 months. So if you're boating in Maine and the boat goes on the hard for 6 months out of the year, all you have to do is call us and ask to suspend your service, and you won't be billed for 6 months. And then the service can automatically resume 6 months later, and there's no fee.
All right, I'll jump in here, Dan, and just want to thank everybody for joining us. If there's anything that we can do to support you, or you have, questions, or simply want to send us pictures, feedback, testimonials, would love to hear everything that you have to share with us. And please reach out at fishmapping@SiriusXM.com. That's fishmapping@SiriusXM.com. Hopefully you love the service, and definitely share our feedback. Come see us at a show, and thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. By the way, the website is SiriusXM.com/fishmapping. Thanks again.